help you with your Cornell notes today that you need to take over the plot of Shakespearean plays. Also, in your Cornell notes, we're going to talk a little bit about characterization of the women of the play. So make sure that you have a notes page. If you need a clean notes page, they're over on the window ledge. So you're welcome to grab one if you need one. But we're going to talk through the plot of a Shakespearean play. If you need to, at any point, you're welcome to obviously pause so that you can write things down as I'm talking, okay? So I'm going to go to slideshow so it's full screen. As you can see, what's a little bit different in a Shakespeare play is where the climax happens. So the reality of our normal plot is that it's the same kind of exposition and then rising action, rising action, rising action, rising action, climax. But then usually the falling action is much shorter and the resolution is much shorter. However, in a Shakespearean play, the falling action is all of Act 4 and the resolution happens in Act 5. So that's a little bit different. You can imagine the reason Shakespeare did that is he wanted people to continue to stay for the rest of the play. So he makes the falling action really interesting and ties up all the loose ends. But the climax happens much, much earlier than it would in a normal piece of fiction, okay? So let's briefly talk through these pieces as you're taking your notes. If I were you, what I'm going to suggest is that you draw this diagram in your notes or on your notes page and that you label the parts of it and also that you write Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, Act 4, and Act 5, and you write down what happens in those acts, okay? So let's begin with Act 1. In Act 1, we get the prologue, the characters, and the setting. They call this in the theater protasis. We call this in fiction the exposition or the beginning. This is the start of the play. So far in Romeo and Juliet, we got the prologue, which told us what was going to happen in the play. We are introduced to the conflict between the Capulets and the Montagues, and there's fighting in the square. We're given the directive by the prince that if there is more fighting, there's going to be the punishment of death. And then we also see Romeo as this heart-struck boy who is being coaxed by Benvolio to go to a party at the Capulet's house. And then at the very end of the act, we see the meeting at the party. Now, in addition, we're introduced to Juliet, to the nurse, and to the side conflict, which is that the family would like to promise her to Paris. So that's going to obviously create tension in our play. All of that happens in Act 1, in the protasis, in the exposition, okay? Then what's going to happen is when Romeo and Juliet meet, it's that point that starts the rising action, okay? Especially once they find out that they are from rival families. That's going to kickstart our action. And then our rising action is going to escalate the conflict through Act 2 and continue to escalate the conflict through Act 3. This is called the epitasis. We would call this in fiction the rising action, right? Now, in addition, the climax is going to happen near the end of Act 3. So again, that's much earlier than it would be in a typical movie or a typical piece of fiction, okay? Then in Act 4, we're going to get all of the falling action. We're going to tie up a bunch of loose ends. There's going to be some kind of heightened drama. I would say the falling action in Romeo and Juliet kind of goes up and down, up and down, up and down. And then in Act 5, we're going to get resolution. Now, what's interesting, they have the French word here, which is denouement. And so that's the French word. And then also the end is called catastrophe. So we know this as resolution and falling action, but there are other words that the theater uses, okay? Now, what I'd like to show you is the next 2 slides just kind of explain the 5 parts that correspond to the 5 acts of the play. So again, we get the protasis or the introduction, we get a description of the rising action, an explanation of what climax, falling action, and then resolution or catastrophe. Okay, so you're welcome to use these slides if you want to fill in some of the pieces of your notes as well. I would say this was one piece of our short story test that some of you didn't do quite as well on. So you might want to make sure that you feel really good about the plot stuff before we take our Romeo and Juliet test. Okay? All right, so as you finish up the plot of the Shakespearean play, we're going to add a few more notes to our character stuff. So if you want to put these where you put your Tybalt, Mercutio, and Romeo notes, that's fine. Or if you want to add another note that says the ladies of the play, and we're going to talk about a little bit about how they're characterized. Okay? So you're going to get lots of images here. This is our Juliet and our Juliet, our Juliet and our Juliet. And our Juliet is characterized as a little bit innocent and naive, very flirty, very sweet. Remember that she's not even 14 years old yet. Usually her hair is worn down and long. She always has kind of a joyful expression on her face. And again, sort of flirty, which is a neat way to describe her. She's much wittier and smarter than I think people want to give her credit for sometimes. Okay? So again, this picture up here, this picture, this picture, this picture, those are our Juliets. Okay? Then these two pictures are our nurse. Now, our nurse is just a common woman. She has been Juliet's nanny since she was a baby. So she takes care of her every need. She's almost closer with the nurse than she is with her own mother. She tells her secrets. They have a very close relationship. But she's just a common working class woman. So sometimes she speaks at length and she just kind of rambles on and people get a little impatient with her. In addition to that, she's trying to see that Juliet is well married. That's something that's important to nurse as well. And she loves Juliet. That's very important for you to pay attention to. Okay. And then both of these are ways that we see Lady Capulet. Lady Capulet is the heiress of the house. She is a lady in all the ways that are expected. She demands Juliet's respect. She believes that Juliet would be well matched with Paris. That would be good for their families. She holds back the temper of Lord Capulet. In both film versions and in the play version, we can see that. So she balances his temper a little bit. All right. But she is elegant, graceful. She's what everyone would expect of a lady of the house. Okay? Okay. And again, this is just that iconography. These images are really great of Juliet. Now, what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to have you go to the module. And in the module, there's a link to Movie, MOVIE. You will have to log in to Swank, but I want you to watch minutes 22 to 39 of the film so that you can see the scene where Romeo and Juliet meet and how that looks. Now, this is the older version, so it's the traditional version, but they do a great job at capturing this initial moment between Romeo and Juliet. If you have any questions, please make sure that you ask your guest teacher or you ask the other teachers in the room. Make sure that you are completing all the activities as listed on the agenda. And thanks, guys. I'll talk to you later, okay?